everybody. Today we have a very special guest in Max Rights tonight, Elissa Shevinksy. Welcome to the show. CTO of a news company and tech icon. Happy Purim. Let's start there.
Happy Purim. Purim Sameach, as we say in the more Yiddish tones. I'm very excited for Purim. Purim is one of the few holidays where it's a mitzvah to be happy, which I appreciate, especially after the year we've all had. I think there's a lot of doom and gloom, and maybe we talk a bit about like why we're happy on Purim.
Well, why are we happy about Purim? Because we escaped genocide. So why are we happy about kind of something that should be?
Again, always. We're always escaping the genocide, but we're especially happy about it on Purim. Purim is this holiday where we drink in excess, which is really weird because there's a Jewish law that you're supposed to never do that. But we do because Purim is about joy. Purim, like the essence of Purim is about joy, and not just joy. Purim is about this idea that we can take all of our animal instincts, all of the things that we're maybe a little ashamed about, like eating and drinking and having like all these desires, and we can lift it up for the good. And I think that's a very Jewish concept, this idea that we shouldn't live in a monastery and we shouldn't never have anything nice, but we should find a way to use it in a good way.
Absolutely. It seems like a lot of competing schools of thought within Judaism too kind of agree on that, on how like important it is to be joyful and not just go through the motions. But do you also kind of see a historical parallel between Purim and now? Because I think it's just like, I'm just fascinated by the story itself, and I do see a few parallels.
I love the Purim story. I think everyone loves the Purim story. There's a concept of like Purim Torah, which is the idea that like nothing you say about Purim is wrong. Like Purim is just this kind of wild and crazy time. So sure, there's parallels to today, but there actually really are. I'm not just saying that. And one of the parallels is at the end of the Purim story, there are two things that happen. The first is they all pay taxes. Which is like
no shit
coming up now, right? I've got TurboTax in my inbox being like, hey Alyssa, why haven't you filed? So at the end they all pay taxes, but also at the end of the Purim story they are all happy. Why are they happy? Because they all punched and killed Nazis.
They didn't just punch. They didn't just punch. They went all the way. They beheaded Nazis.
So the end of the Purim story is all about like, we punched Nazis, all the Nazis, hooray, which brings us to today where, you know, people really want to punch Nazis, and maybe we made some of the Nazis go away for a little while. We could talk about how far away they've gone. That's a useful thing to discuss.
Well, to be clear, so Nazis, is it, you're talking about authoritarianism, correct?
So when I'm talking about Nazis, in the story of the Megillah, they talk about all the descendants of Amalek who wanted to kill the Jews and wanted to deny the existence of God, and were basically just like really, they're described just the worst of the worst, like the most irredeemable people. And there is a widespread belief that modern day Nazis in the 40s were like either the direct ancestors, like that there was a relationship between them and the ancient Amalekites. And so for me, I've kind of merged them all in my mind, where you have like the ancient Nazis and the modern day Nazis, and everything that I understand about fighting modern day Nazis has come from studying like historical examples of the same kind of white supremacist nonsense. And there's authoritarianism in there too. That's important too, but like I wouldn't call the people on the left Nazis necessarily. For me, Nazi conveys like you're trying specifically to murder all the Jews.
And so, so you just mentioned the left. So are you seeing some Nazi-like tendencies on the left and right? Without getting into trouble?
So that's really what Max and I were aiming to focus on today. What I said to Max the other night is that it's my belief, and a lot of people feel this way, that authoritarianism exists on the right and on the left. And to say that isn't to say that we don't have to punch Nazis, right? Like there's a line that you can cross where we have to shut you down. And I believe in that. But it doesn't mean that the left isn't also guilty of having authoritarian tendencies, that we don't need to watch out for that. That's the whole concept of the horseshoe, right? That like the right and the left eventually kind of meet in the middle at this authoritarian place.
We're not so different, you and I. Yeah, definitely. And
well, you and me, because we're independent, we're trying really hard to be.
But the hardcore liberal and the hardcore right guy, they have a lot in common, and they just don't.
They'll agree on a lot of things, and sometimes they do. Like there are examples of this, and I'm not gonna name and shame anyone in particular, but I think most of us can look at, Twitter and the media and identify some people who feel like they fit in that place. But I think what's interesting here, what I'd like to talk about here, is like the problem we get around this. Like the problem of Nazis is kind of apparent, and like we don't need to come in and explain that. And if you don't understand that, like me explaining isn't going to help. There have been explainers, but the problem of the left and the right, like failing to find a middle ground, is really worth talking about, because Biden is here with this mission of uniting the country and
restoring the soul of this nation. He's going to restore the soul. And that is interesting that they talk about concept of souls, and kind of what we were discussing is the right anti-Semitism kind of seems to be more overt, like Jews control this, or we got to, free Jews. And from the left, they kind of do seem to attack the doctrine of Judaism in the Torah. Like Jews are okay, but we don't, that Torah is horrible, and Jews are okay, but the one nation that you guys have is horrible. And so.
Well, and being Jewish isn't necessarily okay. One of the things give me a moment, I'm going to be like vulnerable here, Max, give me a minute, is that,
okay.
So, I've been like really vulnerable and really open in public about a lot of things. And the thing I've been the most secretive and private about, the thing that's hardest for me to be vulnerable about, is the fact that like I'm religiously Jewish in a lot of ways. Like I'll turn my phone off on Shabbos, and like Purim's really important to me. And I believe that like God exists. Like you can't say this. Like you can't say this in public. Like I could get canceled for saying this.
People have.
I'm not scared.
People have.
I'm not
Matthew
scared.
McConaughey and Chris Pratt both kind of got mini canceled for a little bit for just saying like, thank God.
Exactly. And so I think that gets to this thing on the left that's scary. I saw a lot of friends of mine in the Jewish community either voting for Trump or just really scared that Biden would come in. And I had to really look at that, because it was obvious to me that like the dangers of Trump are really apparent to me. But like for people to be that scared of Biden, smart people, right? Like people who I respected, people close to me, people who I never saw behaving in such strange ways before. Like, why are they so scared of Biden? It requires an understanding of the things the left wants to do that religious people actually have very legitimate reasons to be afraid about. And I'll give you one example. Like people in religious communities are really scared that their religious lives are going to be regulated. Not just being told they can't go to synagogue because of COVID, because you can explain that, but that religious education will be regulated. There's no real reason for people to do that other than saying that like religious life isn't okay.
I think they said that in New York, where they were saying that the education that you would get at a yeshiva is inadequate. And so that definitely scares me a little bit. But is the response to that to punch, or is it to kind of be like Mordecai and just not bow down and just be more open about? Because I don't know the answer.
Yeah,
I'm not a fighter, so.
Not a fighter, I'm a lover.
I'm neither. I'm a hater. I'm on Twitter. Just I'm on the message boards.
So, how do you fight that? That's a good question. And maybe it's a different question. The thing I want to look at right now is just like, why is that happening? And talk about that in a minute, which is that the second, like yeshivas sometimes do have subpar education, just like all education is sometimes subpar. I'm a product
public
of
schools. Not the best example.
I'm a product of the New York City public school system, and it was very, very, very bad. To the extent that I'm well educated, it's for things that happened after. And my yeshiva education was some of the best education I got. And so I just don't think New York City is qualified to come in and tell private schools how to do things different. Like, let people go. And what's happening on the left is they're looking at yeshivas and saying, like, it's unacceptable that they're not assimilated into these aspects of American society. Like, it's unacceptable that they don't teach like sex ed or evolution. I think that's a really good example. And I think we should let people opt out of those sorts of things. Like, that has to be okay.
Yeah, but we can't just throw out everything.
What do you mean?
Like, we shouldn't like it does seem like people will have nitpicks with the yeshiva, whatever, but just want to throw out everything, and nitpicks with religion. But like, for example, like the Chris Pratt example, he like was associated with the church where the pastor's brother said something. And so it's kind of like you kind of take a nitpick to define everything, and it's dangerous because you could do the opposite.
Well, what I'm seeing is there will be an issue. There are always different issues where religious people hold a certain way and they have certain values. And maybe those values are questionable to people who don't have them. And maybe some of them are questionable to me, right? Like, I'm currently here, like, not necessarily judging any of that. But what will happen is someone on the left will look at this and say, like, oh, it's a religious person, what they believe is stupid. And that's what I'm trying to bring out.
I don't believe in science, and that really scares me, because a lot of scientists are religious, and they really there's no, it's like not an either or at all.
Well, what I worry about is the idea of dismissing half the country. Like, we can't do that. Even if half the country does believe something terrible and stupid, like, we can't dominate half the country. Like, we all have to figure out how to live with each other, with the exception of, like, if you're a Nazi and you're storming the Capitol with guns and you're actively violent, okay, we're gonna punch you, and I think we should punch you. But that's not most of Max, you understand that difference, right?
There's a line for violence. Yeah.
There's a big line between someone saying, like, I don't believe in science, and I have some problem with that, but, like, they're kind of living in their house not believing in science, right? They're not.
Well, no one says that. I think there's a lot of straw manning, because I do think like a problem with just a lot of prejudice in general is a lack of understanding. And so a lot of just exposure you have, like, think about all the negative pictures you've seen of the Orthodox Jewish community in New York during the COVID situation. And they'll be like, that was from a funeral a year ago. Like, there has been a lot of times where rules have been broken, but I think a lot of it does come from just lack of experience and awareness with religious people. There's a lot
that happens when you actually meet people and get past the stereotypes. But the thing is, some of those stereotypes, like, I was very sad and very disappointed in the things I saw in the religious community. And I had to question whether I still wanted to be in it. The fall was really hard for me because some of the things that happened really weren't okay. And they did come from a lack of science education. And I think we really do need more science education in the religious community. I just don't trust the New York City school system to handle that in a way that will be received properly by the religious community, right? Like, I think it has to be someone like me or someone like you who's going to come in a respectful way and, like, integrate things, not try and assimilate people out of being religious.
That does seem like a horror movie. Like, right? Doesn't, like, hey, oh no, we have you. Don't worry. The New York public school system, it's got you. We're saving the day. Like, hey. Isn't that? I'm not a Ronald Reagan fan, but I think that was the famous quote. The scariest words ever are, "I'm with the government and I'm here to help."
So many years ago, I was very good friends with a boy who he was like an orphan working with Mother Teresa. He was on a fellowship with Fulbright, like, to help orphans around the world. This is a person who'd seen, like, people in bad situations. And I met him, and he was like, you were in the public school system in New York, and he just, like, cried. It was so sad for me. Like, I'm so sorry for you. I was like, what? Like, of everything you've seen. And he had this compassion because he wasn't wrong. The New York City public school system for me was just this instrument of tremendous, like, authoritarian horror, and terrible.
It does seem like they are training for that. Like, I've heard conspiracies, like, with the bells, like, how they're priming you to just kind of be a worker bee, to, like, oh, it's second period, I gotta do this. It's third period, gotta do that. Like, only one answer to every question.
I think a lot of people mean well, but when a big question I always had was, like, why, as I became older and I went and became better educated and I looked back, it's like, how come our education was so, like, white supremacist? Like, this was a very diverse part of Queens. I had, like, teachers were Black. Like, why this curriculum that just, like, heralds Christopher Columbus and doesn't make any mention of things like that the Jews ever had a temple? Like, there's all this stuff missing. And and it goes back to the start of the public school system. I'll have to give you the links. Maybe you can share it with your readers.
Please do. We'll put in the description.
So the New York City public school system like receives all of this information from bigger systems that did have their origins in white supremacy, and at some degree in like making people be a little bit more compliant, which is why like the good education I got came from going to places like Williams, which bred, like James Garfield, who became president. Like it was about turning people into leaders, not turning people into worker bees. So all of that's a little bit of a side rant.
But it is related, because I think you're kind of training authoritarian people, because I kind of have noticed like we're in a tattletale culture where everyone's trying to get approval, because everyone hates their boss and they hates the principal, but they're also first to kind of tell on their classmate to get ahead. And so I definitely think it is almost priming people to be tattletales, for lack of a better word.
We need to be more cooperative with each other.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of individuality in my public school training. Like I had to raise my hand, I had to succeed, and it was me against my classmates. And that didn't really take so hard because the stakes weren't all that high. But then I went to Williams and it was about teamwork. It was very explicitly about teamwork. And like the highest thing you could do is to be in a sport, which
the
is
bell
all
curve
about,
is evil. Like, why do you need to have a certain amount of A's? Shouldn't the goal for everyone to pass the class? Instead of we can only have 10 people that get A's.
well,
like
so
that definitely seems.
I'm going to ask you something that we didn't talk about in the pre-session, which is, we all have this individuality that has been encouraged and has benefits, and we're kind of tattling each other out. How are we ever going to fix like these massive problems that require us all to cooperate?
Because everyone agrees, but no one wants to actually do anything about it. And it really is just such a tangled mess. Like there's so many layers of bureaucracy that you have to cut through. Like there isn't one person that can be in a position that could just wave a wand.
I will urge on this topic that one of the first steps will be for us to stop fighting each other the way that we are. And so here in America, we have this culture war. We have so many things going on where the left and the right are battling with this complete disrespect for each other. And so on the right, there's this feeling that they want to maintain the culture that they always had. And you have all of these people coming in and like disrupting that. And they just, that they want to fight that in a violent way. And in some respects, if you are unwilling to share, then violence may be the only answer. Just, I don't approve of this concept of being unwilling to share. That's a problem. Or leave, right? Like you're unwilling to share and you're unwilling to leave. And so the right is just violent right now. That's that. But on the left, there's this lack of willingness to understand like the 50% of people in the middle, like the people like my rabbi who was scared of Biden winning and is like a very nonviolent person, right? And like definitely not a Nazi white supremacist.
No, he just has probably 5 kids that are going to go to yeshiva. And he's like, what am I going to do? Because the Torah says we got to raise my kids a certain way. And this president might change my way of life.
There are these elements in the world and they always exist and we have to fight them, right? Like we just have to understand that we have to like punch back authoritarianism always as it rears its head. Like we're not going to make friends with authoritarianism. But on the question of joy, I think, I've got these cardinals that eat seed outside my window and it's like really sweet. And it was just, I have like people in my life I care about, like I'm making this servers run at work. It's really cool. So I think you find things, just got to find things, right?
Absolutely. And don't cancel people. If you try to understand them, try to like walk a mile in their shoes, but don't steal the shoes, ask for the shoes, because that's a whole other issue.
Well, I'd say if they're Nazis, we cancel them. I'm in favor of deplatforming like the few people who are truly, truly so violent that there is no peaceful option. It's a small number. It's not everyone.
I want to end there. So what for people listening, because like there are people that clearly are beyond redemption, and that it's not even like people say violence is bad. Violence might be the moral thing to do in a situation. Like if someone's gonna shoot up a school, like if you stop that person, you're doing a good thing. So where would so you kind of established where you would draw the line, but like how would you tell people to kind of get like what form how could they kind of test it for themselves?
That's a good question. I'd say that there's a large group in America, maybe 50% of America, that are just different from whoever you are. But if they're not violent, if they're not actively trying to hurt you, if they're just trying to live their own life, but it seems weird or different, like I think we should just leave them be, even if it seems really distasteful. Like we're a really diverse mix of people, and we're not all going to like what we're doing, and we just have to draw the distinction between like a violent mob that's willing to kill government officials, and people who just have beliefs that seem strange.
So violence is kind of where you draw the line. If people are kind of trying to get rid of a certain group or targeting, then
Yeah,
you
I'd
can
say
then
that's
start
right.
punching away, get the gloves out, people. But until then, try to have some patience and understanding for the
Yeah,
people that
I'd
are just
say
different.
ask like, can we coexist? Are they letting me coexist?
Yeah, and you were saying most people aren't evil, because I'd agree with that. There's probably like a small percentage that probably get control over people that are apathetic.
I'd say most people are just staying in their houses, or not going very far.
Well, right now, it's like 90% of people.
Yeah, so maybe we revisit this question post-pandemic.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to postpone till then. Thank you so much, Elissa, for having on the show, and it's been a blast. And we'll put some links put some good educational material in the description. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Max, and happy Purim.
Happy Purim.